Communism is a loser, and it always will be. The communist system is the opposite of the American system, and the communist system has never worked. Our warriors did not fight communism on battlefields across the world, only to have that menace rear its ugly head, right? Here in America, we won't let it happen.
He declared a complete victory over Iran, proclaimed the American economy the strongest in the world, and talked a lot about communism, for some reason blaming the Democrats for it. Donald Trump delivered a historic speech against the backdrop of a historic fireworks display over Washington. The United States celebrated the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence the day before. And so Donald Trump took the stage after a long delay, first because of a thunderstorm, then because of extreme heat. The speech lasted a long time. Trump himself promised the greatest show and asked the audience to come and see, quote, their favorite president. This was not a traditional unifying Independence Day speech like the ones given by, for example, Gerald Ford or Ronald Reagan. It was a campaign speech, triumphalist in style and at times grimly political. In this episode, we will go through Donald Trump's speech with you word for word, discuss what is truly important in it, and how each striking line echoes his real policies. Because Trump stated, for example, and I quote, that we wiped out Iran, we are richer and safer than ever before, the dawn of a golden age has come, and so on. But behind these beautiful words, unfortunately, stands a divided country, a shaky deal with the fanatics, and according to historians, the deepest internal split since the Civil War. Well, for context, according to the Financial Times and the latest sociological surveys, 58% of Americans believe that the US war with Iran was not worth the costs incurred. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss together how America celebrated 250 years since the Declaration of Independence, but specifically in the context of what exactly Donald Trump was talking about. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video.
People, for 250 years, the United States of America has been the hope, the promise, the light, and the glory among all of the nations of the world. All over the world, they try and be like us. Nobody can be like us. And with God's help, we will always be this or even better.
So, America marked the 250th anniversary of its own Declaration of Independence. By the way, it was celebrated lavishly with a massive fireworks display and a high-profile speech by Donald Trump. I'm not going to do a report here. I want to analyze Donald Trump's speech specifically and compare it with reality. The core message of the American president's speech is the idea that America is not aging but just beginning, and then there were grand promises. And I quote, at 250 years old, we may be the oldest constitutional republic on earth, but our country is just beginning because the best is yet to come. This is just the dawn of America's golden age. On this 250th anniversary, we declare, just as they declared 2.5 centuries ago, for our country, for our children, and for the cause of freedom, we will lift our nation to new heights, to levels that have not yet been reached. We have achieved. We will make it bigger, better, stronger, and we will love it even more. Well, it's interesting here, as they say, to check what exactly Donald Trump means when he says that America will become bigger. Is this a hint that he will be seizing new territories? Well, the phrase about the golden age of America is not new at all. Trump has been using it throughout his entire second presidential term. Throughout the entire speech, there was a recurring statement about unprecedented prosperity. Quote, and today our country is stronger, freer, richer, safer, and much prouder than ever before. Well, he also added some economic points. Our stock market is the strongest in history. We have $19.2 trillion being invested in our country, which is 6 times more than ever before. We're building more US factories than ever, and more people are working in the United States today than at any time in our history. How does all of this relate to reality? Well, Trump's economic statements traditionally only show a pretty facade. And behind that facade is his real policy. It's an aggressive tariff war. These are trade deals that are directly tied to national security issues. That is, today the US uses protectionist policies and trade wars for its own prosperity. It's neither good nor bad, we're just stating the fact. But I would say this. Donald Trump's speech was a campaign speech because for several days now he has been pushing the idea that Democrats are the same as communists. For several weeks now, I would say, he has been pushing the topic of communism in general. In every speech he mentions communism, Karl Marx, and so on and so forth. And so, on the eve at Mount Rushmore on July 3rd, he stated, quote, "Communism is a deadly threat to American freedom. It is the greatest threat to our country, including World War I, World War II, Pearl Harbor, and even September 11th. You can't really argue with him unless you consider the context of what he's saying. Trump went further, calling communism an enemy of the Constitution, an enemy of July 4, 1776, and directly linking it to immigration. Here is his quote. "Now we are witnessing a resurgence of the communist threat on our soil, including from newcomers to our country who hold ideas completely opposed to our way of life. We'd like to stop such a threat immediately, even before it starts. It's like cancer, it needs to be cut out, and cut out quickly. The point is, in recent weeks, Donald Trump has been using the word communist as a label for a whole range of Democrats running for Congress this November. This is a classic political strategy game. It's a very banal and simple tactic, to brand someone and, for example, call the Democrats communists. Say they're communists, we're against communism, so we're against the Democrats. And then go on to talk about how bad communism is without actually explaining specifically what's wrong with the Democrats, what the Democrats did wrong, and so on. You don't even talk about the Democrats, and you've already put a label on them, and then you go on to talk about how bad communism is as a phenomenon. Of course, any reasonable person wouldn't argue with that. A reasonable person would say, well, yes, communism is evil. How can anyone support communism at all? But is a Democrat the same as a communist? Is this formula really an axiom? Well, at the very least, you could argue with that. And overall, this July 4th, but it turned into election campaigning not only from Trump. The mayor of New York, Zakran Mamdani, in his speech on July 4th, without mentioning Trump by name, responded to the president's repeated talking point about immigrants. Quote, "Dopobaiki. From generation to generation, we've been told that when the world sends its people to our shores, it doesn't send the best. The ideals on which our nation was built are strong enough to survive any authoritarian regime, but only if we strive for them." But the foreign policy part of Donald Trump's speech was basically an anthem to power. Trump directly linked the anniversary to recent military operations. And then his quote, "We rebuilt our military during my first presidential term. Look at Venezuela, look at Iran, we wiped them out, wiped out their military." Speaking of Iran, Trump said the following, quote, "Like our recent victory, when we sank the entire Iranian fleet, 159 ships to the bottom, all in an instant. We have the greatest army in the world. America is a nation of winners, and today our country is winning again." Well, I completely understand that on Independence Day in the United States, it's exactly the time to make such speeches. Patriotic, triumphalist, and so on and so forth. It's all clear, that's the atmosphere. But it's also worth admitting that the war with Iran, which began on February 28th, 2026 by the time of the holiday, by July 4th had not been brought to a triumphant close. It's very difficult to declare this war a victory for the US because this war is holding on to a fragile truce. It's holding on to a framework memorandum of understanding which is constantly on the verge of falling apart. That's why, let me remind you, just a week ago, there were exchanges of strikes in the Hormuz Strait. And even US intelligence doubts Tehran's intentions. And US intelligence is warning Trump, saying, listen, Tehran is not going to follow through with this deal. They're just buying time. At the same time, leading think tanks consider the deal to be more beneficial for Iran than for America. Lifting of sanctions, access to frozen assets, and retained uranium. And Financial Times conducted a sociological survey among Americans the day before, and the results were surprising. 58 voters stated that this campaign against Iran was not worth its costs. 44% of Americans believe that the war has left the US in a weaker position in relation to Iran, while the opposite opinion, that the conflict has actually strengthened Washington's position, is held by 31% of Americans. That's less than a third of Americans who believe that yes, America really came out as the winner of this war. As for diplomatic efforts, 66% of Americans said that the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran will either have almost no effect on stability in the Middle East, or, on the contrary, will increase instability and raise the likelihood of a new conflict. So, well, it's kind of embarrassing to call this a victory. Against this background, only 36% of voters overall approve of Donald Trump's performance as president. And here is one of the most politically charged moments of the speech, when Trump wove a specific election bill into the celebration. It might seem out of place here, but as I said, this was purely a campaign speech. Next is a quote from Trump. "America is back, and we want to keep America great, and we will do that by passing the Save America Act. Which means all voters must show identification. All voters must provide a little thing called proof of citizenship. And there will be no mail-in voting except in cases of illness, disability, military service, or travel. And there will be no more election fraud." It's all very simple. Well, as you can see, it's about elections again, and Trump once again used his speech for campaigning. And he stated that Republicans can lose, and I quote, "only if we allow ourselves to lose the midterm elections without abolishing the Senate filibuster and without passing the Save America Act." Again, this was a speech on the 250th anniversary of the Proclamation of Independence of the United States of America, which it would seem should unite all Americans, but it didn't. Trump says, "We have elections ahead, so I'm using this speech for campaign purposes." The president is using a national anniversary to promote a pre-election bill that limits mail-in voting and adds new requirements. A package that restricts mail-in voting and introduces new identification requirements. And finally, Trump made another policy statement about the capital of the United States of America. Quote, "Our capital is now safe, shining, and beautiful again. It is safe again. From a very unsafe place 2 years ago, it has turned into one of the safest cities in the country." And here, as you can imagine, it's about elections again. The point is that behind this phrase lies his entire policy towards cities and states. And Trump tried in every possible way to cut funding for the so-called blue states and cities, where the Democrats are in power in almost all domestic areas. Healthcare, housing, disaster preparedness, and so on, unless they adopt instead the red, that is, Republican policy on immigration and other issues. In fact, Trump even did this, but the courts later blocked these decisions. Once again, if you didn't get it, those states and cities where the Democrats are in power, Trump deliberately cut their funding, canceled funding so that the situation there would get worse. So that later he could say, look, where the Republicans are, things are good, where the Democrats are, things are bad. Now let's put together the background against which all this was said, because it gives Trump's words a special meaning. First of all, America itself was celebrating the anniversary divided and full of doubt, and that's not just my conclusion. According to an April AP NORC poll, only about 4 out of 10 adult Americans felt pride in the country's 250th anniversary, and only about 3 out of 10 felt inspired. As you can understand, this is not a picture of universal celebration, the kind that Trump painted from the stage. Secondly, the holiday was literally disrupted by the elements. Unusual heat and thunderstorms canceled the parade in Washington and the parade in Philadelphia. Oh, by the way, why is there also a parade in Philadelphia? Because that's the very city where the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. So they planned to have a parade both in Washington and in Philadelphia. Both were cancelled because the weather was terrible. Thirdly, during the same anniversary celebration, there were completely different voices being heard. The first American Pope, that's Leo XIV, when accepting the Medal of Freedom, named the fundamental ideals of America. A quote, "Work that is not yet finished, and which every generation must cherish, emphasizing the value of human dignity." Especially in light of his earlier statements about the situation facing migrants. Well, by the way, Pope Leo and Trump are in open conflict. Fourth, Trump further polarized society with his pardons. Among the guests at the celebration, for example, was Glenn Brooks, a participant in the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot who was pardoned by Trump. Well, I should note that Brooks is a man who was convicted by a court for attacking the very symbol of American democracy, the United States Congress. Trump pardoned him and gave him an honorary seat during the celebration of that very day, the Independence Day of the United States of America. In general, share your opinions and conclusions about the celebration of the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence, and especially Donald Trump's speech, in the comments below this episode. There we can discuss together and have our own separate dialogue, or you can also talk among yourselves on this topic. Subscribe to the channel, like the episode, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications about new episodes. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.